Friends, welcome back. Now, I'm looking at issues raised by Elton John's autobiography, Me. Today, I'm going to look at chapter 2, still focusing on him emerging as a songwriter and his very early years of performance. I welcome your comments, and I will do a follow-up video looking at some of the issues you've raised. I've also created a playlist on YouTube which has links to lots of the songs and groups referred to by Elton in his autobiography, and I'll link that below. Now, chapter 2 begins with a reference to Elton John's first single. Now, devotees will know that that's called Come Back Baby. This was out on Fontana Records, and it's a song that Elton had written both the tune and the lyrics for. Now, I don't know whether you've heard this or not, but I don't think it's that bad a record. Now, Elton pours scorn on it, and there's a little interview clip that I've linked to in which he sort of is not very complimentary about it, especially the lyrics. Okay, the lyrics aren't great. The tune actually is pretty good, I think. See what you think to that. And for a first outing on vinyl, it's not a bad effort at all. There's a second one mentioned as well called Mr. Frantic, which I'm not quite so keen on. But again, these are really early evidence of some potential here from Elton as a performer, because before that he'd just been writing tracks that he wanted other people to perform. So he's just emerging now as a possible performer, as a possible vocalist. Now, Elton also talks about a lot of the bands performing at that time and talking about how they kind of took on hits from America and did their own versions of it. And I think he was a little bit unhappy with this in a way because it didn't give the chance for the original artists to sort of make their way in the UK. And one of the songs he refers to there is Patti LaBelle's A Groovy Kind of Love, which I think Phil Collins had a cover version of much later, of course. So you can understand why that might be a problem for the American artists. If you reverse the situation, I mean, how would Elton have felt if lots of artists in the US were having hits with his songs before he'd had a chance to break into the market there? Now, another one of the groups he encountered on the sort of the circuit, he's playing now with Bluesology, of course, and he encounters a group called The Move, which has as their lead singer the legendary Roy Wood, of course. And I think he was pretty impressed with their, what he calls their wild stage act. But he kind of saw in them the potential of what he could be and what Bluesology possibly could be, or him without Bluesology. It was like another level of performing, and maybe that's an influence on some of his showmanship that he came to exhibit more in the 1970s. Now, of course, Bluesology then go on to be linked with Long John Baldry because they became his support backing act at the time when he was touring in France. Now, Long John Baldry, of course, is a key player in one of Elton's greatest songs, which we'll come to very shortly. But in the meantime, Elton goes for another audition, and he chooses as his audition piece a Jim Reeves song called He'll Have to Go. I've put that on the playlist as well. Now, he's no idea, looking back, why he chose that song, because it's hardly typical of the sort of thing he'd been playing or wanted to play. Maybe he just thought it was a good audition song. What else could he have chosen? I don't know. Maybe something a little bit more upbeat, a little bit more suited to his voice, perhaps. Now, so this is Liberty Records, and he meets a guy there called Ray Williams. Now, there's a very key moment in Elton's career coming up. This is how he describes it. There's loads of stuff in this office, okay, audition tapes, lyrics. Now, Ray Williams seems to pull an envelope out at random just to give out something to take away from the meeting, so it wasn't a complete dead loss. He can't even remember if he'd even opened it or not before he'd handed it over to Elton. So it may have been just a sealed envelope. And yet Elton says, that envelope had my future in it. Everything that's happened to me since happened because of what it contained. Now, of course, it contained a stack of lyrics from Bernie Taupin. Now, if that envelope was handed over unopened, it's even more remarkable what followed. I suppose if Ray Williams had a chance to have a look through them, he might have felt, well, this is a possible match for Elton. But if it was unopened, that's even more of a fluke, isn't it? The whole of Elton's career and Bernie's career depended on that meeting of great minds. Now, I think Elton would have been a star and a great songwriter anyway, because talent will out, won't it? But it may not have been that his career developed in the same way that it did, this great meeting of minds so early in their career. So you could call it kind of a sliding doors moment, but from there, history was made, if you like. So Elton then takes a tube train home from Baker Street, and while he's on the tube, he opens the envelope. Now, he doesn't actually say which set of lyrics he looked at first, and that would be really interesting to know. So, maybe, Elton, if you've got a moment and if you're watching, can you remember what was the first lyric you actually pulled out of that envelope? We'd really like to know. And what else was in that first one? Because we know your song was going to be there. Was Border Song in there? Were there some other ones from the Elton John album, The King Must Die? Was that written in there? It'd be really interesting to get back to that first envelope and look at what happened to all those lyrics there. So Elton then talks about getting together with Bernie and the writing process that started. So Bernie was tapping out lyrics on a typewriter in the bedroom, bringing them to Elton at the upright piano in the living room, and then scurrying back to the bedroom again. They couldn't be in the same room, they had to be in separate rooms. Now there's a little bit of this on the Rocket Man film, quite nicely done, and this we assume is how your song came to be written. But then we have I've Been Loving You as a single. Now, this turned out to be a total flop, as Elton John says. This is March in 1968. He's still at the stage here where he doesn't particularly want to be a solo artist. Maybe he's just sort of putting this out because nobody else will at the time. But, it's an interesting period, isn't it? Still 1968, not far off from those glory days, is it, in the early 1970s? And he still didn't see himself as a solo performer. But something happens when he writes and records Skyline Pigeon. Now, we know this first version of this was probably with the harpsichord rather than the piano. I think I'm right in saying the harpsichord version is earlier. That's certainly the one on Empty Sky. Now, Elton comments, and this is significant here, I still couldn't think of anyone else it sounded like. And that's a turning point because he realizes that he has a unique sound. And of course he did. And that may have been the moment that he thought, well, hang on, if I don't sound like anybody else, and if I do get interest from the public and they start buying these records, then I'm going to be onto something. And thank goodness he did realize that. Now, another key moment, Elton gets engaged to a woman called Linda Woodrow. Now, you probably know this story already. You know that he wasn't sure whether he could go ahead with this marriage or not. And there was a late intervention from Long John Baldry to say, hang on, think about who you are. Think about, your lifestyle, if you like. Is this marriage really going to be such a great idea? And from that, Bernie wrote the lyrics to Someone Save My Life Tonight, which, as we all know, is one of the greatest songs that Elton and Bernie wrote and that Elton recorded. Now, there's quite a bit of bitterness in those lyrics there, and if you look at them quite carefully, you'll see that Bernie wasn't a huge fan of Linda, a dominating queen sitting like a princess perched in her electric chair. So when you get into the real meaning of this, you realise what a great lyric that is as well. And Elton reserved or thought up, a great melody for it as well, and we're still seeing that sort of 50 years later. So it's an interesting read, that chapter, and what really comes out of it is how much chance is involved in making it in the music business. Elton, we know, is supremely talented and still is, so he probably would have made it, but for that fortuitous envelope drawn from a pile, he may never have hooked up with Bernie, who's been such an important influence on Elton. Okay, Elton has used other lyricists, but it's really in those Elton and Bernie tracks when sort of all that talent comes together. Great lyrics, Great songwriting and great performance as well. Those three essential elements that I always refer to that make a great record. So what do you think about this? What do you think about Elton's very earliest records? Any other observations or piece of information you want to add? Thanks very much. If you want to comment on the idea of luck and how fortuitous that is, please do. I'll be back with another video looking at some issues raised in the third chapter of the autobiography. Thanks for watching.